Odisha, a state that was once dismissed as backward and poor, is quietly becoming India's steel and mining powerhouse. In financial year 2000, Odisha's gross state domestic product or GSDP was around 37,000 crores. As of the current financial year, it's projected to cross over 10 lakh crore rupees. From being one of the poorest regions of India to now attracting billions of dollars in investments annually, Odisha's rise is one of the most underreported success stories in modern India. In the 10th episode of our series on the rise and fall of states, we decode the economic rise of Odisha, the challenges it has faced, and whether its industrial success is truly sustainable. Odisha sits on a gold mine, almost literally. The state holds 35% of India's iron ore reserves, nearly 25% of coal, 92% of chromite, 63% of bauxite, and 33% of manganese. But here's the paradox. Despite this abundance, Odisha has historically remained poor. For decades after independence, it lagged behind in industrial output, infrastructure, and social indicators like health, education, and per capita income. This is known as resource curse, where regions rich in natural resources actually grow slower, often because of corruption, conflict, and poor governance. For a long time, this was Odisha's reality. What further worsened the dynamics for Odisha was the freight equalization policy, which was introduced in 1952. The freight equalization policy aimed to neutralize the advantages of mineral-rich states like Odisha, Jharkhand, and Chhattisgarh. Under this policy, the central government subsidized railway freight so that transporting minerals and industrial inputs across India would cost the same. This basically meant that no matter whether a factory was in Gujarat or Odisha, the cost of raw materials would end up being the same, since the transportation cost was virtually paid by the government. For this reason, in 1980s and 1990s, most iron and steel plants were built in Maharashtra, Gujarat, West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, and not Odisha. This resulted in minerals being extracted from Odisha but processed elsewhere. Odisha bore the environmental and social costs but gained very little in terms of value addition or jobs. Sounds familiar? This is exactly what the Britishers did to India in the colonial era. India's raw materials were taken, particularly indigo, processed elsewhere, and the final products were sold everywhere in the world, including India. Since it's happening within India now, it's called internal colonialism. Odisha had abundant coal, iron ore, bauxite, and manganese, yet it attracted very little industry and investments until the 2000s. Things began to change with India's 1991 liberalization and 1993 when the freight equalization policy was scrapped. As the country opened up to private investments and global markets, Odisha's mineral wealth suddenly became highly attractive to both domestic and foreign investors. The Naveen Patnaik government, which came into power in the 2000s, recognized the potential and began aggressively marketing Odisha as an investment destination. Naveen Patnaik, as the Chief Minister, would go on to change the face of Odisha. His pitch was simple: cheap land, abundant minerals, and a reform-friendly administration. In the early 2000s, because of the same reason, the state saw a flood of MOUs signed with major players like POSCO, Vedanta, Tata Steel, Jindal, and ArcelorMittal. In fact, Odisha signed over 90 MOUs worth billions between 2000 and 2010, promising industrial parks, steel plants, aluminium smelters, and power hubs. But then came the pushback. The problem? Much of this industrial development came at the cost of tribal land, forests, and traditional livelihoods. Nearly 23% of Odisha's population is tribal with deep spiritual and ecological ties to their land. The massive land acquisition drives led to forced displacement, inadequate compensation, and social unrest. A great example of this is the project by POSCO. The POSCO project in Jagatsinghpur, a $12 billion steel plant, was supposed to be India's single largest FDI at the time. But it faced decades of protests, legal battles, and violence. Eventually, POSCO pulled out in 2017, citing delays and resistance. By the way, Warren Buffett's right-hand man, Charlie Munger, too has talked about this particular project, highlighting a critical problem with India. Here is what he had to say. Korean company POSCO invented a new way of creating steel out of a lousy iron ore and lousy coal. And there's some province in India that has lots of lousy iron ore and lousy coal, which there is not much use for. And this one process would take the lousy iron ore and coal and make a lot of steel. And they got a lot of cheap labor too. So POSCO and India were a match made for each other. And they made a deal with the province to get together and use POSCO's know-how and India's lousy iron ore and lousy coal. and 8 or 9 or 10 years later, everybody's screaming and objecting and farmers lying down in the road or whatever's going on, they cancelled the whole thing. In China, they would have just done it. It does highlight a critical problem in India. Anyway, these events force the government and companies to slow down, rethink, and adopt a more inclusive model of development. While foreign players struggled, Indian giants adapted better. Tata Steel, Jindal Steel and Power, and Hindalco played the long game. They invested in local communities, built CSR frameworks, and aligned better with state policies. Tata Steel, unlike POSCO, acquired land in phases, offered equity to displaced families, and set up local training centers. This micro-level approach helped them succeed in Kalinganagar, where others failed. JSPL and Hindalco did the same, and JSPL's Angul plant, Tata Steel's Kalinganagar plant, and Hindalco's Utkal Alumina project gradually picked up steam. Over time, Odisha emerged as India's top iron ore producer and a significant player in aluminium and steel exports. The state now contributes over 25% of India's total steel production capacity, and the success hasn't just been in heavy industry. There's been a push towards logistics as well. The Paradip port has been modernized, freight corridors have improved, and inland waterways and rail connectivity are now helping Odisha emerge as an export-oriented industrial hub. The industrial sector now contributes over 40% to the state's GSDP, way higher than the national average. One of the smartest moves that Odisha has made in the recent years is to shift from just raw material exports to value-added manufacturing. Earlier, iron ore was mined and exported with minimal processing, but now the state is encouraging companies to set up beneficiation plants, pellet plants, and steel rolling units, so more value is captured within the state itself. The idea is simple: don't just dig and dump, process, produce, and profit. The government's Vision 2030 aims to make Odisha a manufacturing and logistics powerhouse with an ambitious target of attracting over 5 lakh crores in fresh industrial investments in the next 5 years. Isn't that just remarkable? That said, critics argue that bureaucracy still remains slow and local corruption, at the lower levels at least, continues to plague investors. Further, despite investments in steel and mining, Odisha still suffers from high unemployment and underemployment. The mining and metals sector is capital intensive and not particularly labor intensive. So while factories may bring crores in revenue, they don't really create enough jobs, especially for the rural and tribal youth. However, none of this can undermine the rise Odisha has seen in the recent years. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. I hope to see you again soon.